Okay, so this is Ellen. She's right in the midst of a tough duel with a former Formula 1 world champion racing around the short loop of the old Hockenheim circuit. The year is 1992, the grandstands are packed, the summer sun is beaming down from the sky. This is peak DTM, and Ellen Lohr is about to make history, but let's back up a bit. Usually, women weren't that much of a factor in the early days of DTM. We're talking about what I like to call the machismo era of racing, where grid girls had served as the most poignant representation of feminine existence within the world of touring cars. So for Ellen Lohr to even make it into the Deutsche Tourenwagenmeisterschaft was a huge sensation. Amongst the Schneiders, Teams, Ludwigs, and Questers, she threw a proverbial cat into this party of pigeons. That said, her career up to this point could have only led to such fine pastures, theoretically speaking. This story can be read as the successful tale of a talented trailblazer. Ellen's career had started in go-karts, with her father being a huge influence, though it wasn't until her time in German Formula Ford where the industry truly started to take note. Nowadays, you could use Formula Regional as a somewhat solid comparison to the role of Formula Ford at the time. If you wanted to make it big in racing, you better perform in these nimble cars, aerodynamics being non-existent, as pure as motorsport can get. And right there, amongst the cream of the German junior racing crop, Ellen was to thrive. 3 years in the category would culminate with the chemistry student from Mönchengladbach winning the 1987 German Formula Ford Championship. Not bad for a girl who'd essentially considered all of this a fun hobby. Lohr's subsequent Formula 3 exploits consisted of fighting toe-to-toe with an array of potential superstars: Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Mika Häkkinen, Otto Rensing, Karl Wendlinger, Michael Schumacher. 3 years in a Volkswagen work steel saw her score points and podiums, though a win was to elude the fierce racer for that part of her career. Bear in mind that German F3 was one of Europe's top junior single-seater categories at the time, and where her original masterpiece had been a regional adventure, her next big break was to be fought for on a stage befitting racing royalty: Monaco. 1989 was to see her finish second in the Monaco Formula 3 final. Back then, F3 ran a Macau-esque non-championship event featuring the stars of the future, and Ellen was right there, only scored behind upcoming touring car legend Laurent Aiello. So far, so good. What had once started as a pastime for Ellen and her family had quickly turned into a flourishing career. Still, when it came to the next step, things were all but clear for the future. So it's not too surprising, you'd think, that somebody within the realm of DTM would survey Ellen as a suitable candidate for one of these silver lunchboxes. Germany's touring car masterclass had already witnessed her talent in 1987. In between Formula Ford races, Ellen raced at 3 events, finishing second on her final outing for Alpina BMW. And as the magazine Sportauto had sponsored her in Formula Ford, said connection was to be of immense value for Lohr's return in 1991. Norbert Haug, the then chief editor of the magazine, had switched to the dark side of Mercedes-Benz for a career in management. He brought Ellen into the fold of DTM drivers, representing a new generation of enthusiasm for the antiquated brand. This is where Ellen was to go from the status of potential princess to conquering queen. For context, 1992's DTM was quite a stark contrast to what we now know today. Different manufacturers were aplenty, while beatin' and bangin' was to make NASCAR look like a fun afternoon at the ballpark. Weekend after weekend, tens of thousands flocked to Zolder, Nuremberg, Berlin, Singen, or Hockenheim. F1 superstars had turned the Tourenwagenmeisterschaft into a second home. Looking at you, Jacques Lafitte, Keke Rosberg, Emmanuel Lepiro. era. Winning in DTM, therefore, wasn't a side note in the world of motorsport, it was immensely prestigious. 2 races were to be run each weekend, with the Rennsport Festival on May 24th, 1992 being no exception. And our main protagonist for this story managed to qualify particularly well on this occasion. To be fair, her inaugural season hadn't been what you might call breathtaking, only 2 points finishes to her name. A learning year, a chance for her to hone her craft. The good news is, Ellen managed to score her very first podium of the new season 2 weeks ago at the legendary Avos in Berlin. So with a bit of momentum on her side, who knows what she might achieve starting in 5th. The races go and Klaus Ludwig streaks away, flying the flag for Mercedes ahead of Keke Rosberg and championship leader Kurt Team. Finland's former Formula 1 ace is pushing Ludwig, which seems to have put a lot of pressure on the touring car icon. His off-road excursion was caused by all left on the track, which in turn helped Rosberg to P1. Time for a pace car phase, during which Ellen found herself in P3. And seeing as Kurt Team seemingly felt a sense of unease not joining in the Mercedes party of petulant off-roading, Lohr had climbed from 5th to 2nd, only stationed behind her more experienced teammate, and sparks were about to fly.
Ellen Lohr ist wie in Berlin momentan fast sensationell Zweite. Nicht zu glauben, was dieses Mädchen aufführt in diesem Jahr. Soll ich Ihnen noch was sagen? Die Ellen Lohr fährt im Moment die schnellsten Runden im ganzen Feld. 1:06,1. Also sowas habe ich ja in den 30 Jahren, in denen ich sowas mache, noch nicht erlebt. Das sind wir aber alle mal von den Socken hier oben. Und nimmt das Mädchen den Mut her, die Kondition, das Herz, die Einstellung zu einem solchen Kampf mit einem solchen Mann. Sehen Sie, wie Rosberg fährt, der hat ein Reifenproblem. Der hat zu weich gewählt und jetzt bauen die Dinger ab. Jetzt hat sie ihn, sie hat ihn. Dieses Mädchen aus Mönchengladbach ist nicht nur eine vorzügliche Rennfahrerin, sie ist eine Sympathieträgerin. Braucht beim Publikum, die Leute mögen sie. Sie ist auch für Mercedes-Benz ein Mädchen, das viel an Sympathie rüberbringt, das viel in dieser Mannschaft für gute Laune sorgt. Alle akzeptieren sie, sie sagen nicht, das ist ein Mädchen, gegen die wir kämpfen. Das ist einfach eine Wettbewerberin und sie steht hier ihrem Mann wirklich so wie die anderen auch.
And she did it. Ellen Lohr becomes the first woman in history to win a DTM race, dueling with one of its illustrious stars to do so. A glorious day for her career and for Mercedes-Benz. God, I wonder what she can do in race 2. Keke, you cheeky motherfucker. You'd think that Ellen would be elated, that here was a superstar making performance for all the world to see. Well, I told you that her story could be read as a successful tale, a triumph of fortitude. That's not how I read what happened, because as much as Ellen managed to shine in the spotlight of DTM, this is not where she had wanted to go originally. Let's go for another rewind. Ellen's dream, her ambition was to race in Formula 1. It might have seemed impossible throughout her Formula 4 days, but that sweet little trip to the Principality in 1990 had promised a lot. She was told that those performing well in the streets of Monaco would be touted by a few Grand Prix racing teams for tests and further evaluation. Laurent Aiello is a prime example of this, despite never racing in a Formula 1 event. Ellen, on the other hand, was to receive nothing. No attention. Zero. In an interview with Formula Scout, she states, "Many people who I raced with during the time tell me with this talent and these results, nowadays, I would have had a really good chance to move up the ladder in the formulas. At the time, it was completely different. It seems like it was yesterday, but it's many centuries ago. The world was very different at the time when it came to female careers in a male's world," she reflects. Her next step would have been Formula 3000. Back in the day, it served as the final frontier towards F1 in its Piranha Club. And it's not as though Ellen wasn't capable in these cars. Testing Karl Wendlinger's F3000 machine at the then Österreichring, she'd set a new lap record for the car. Wendlinger was off to race in the World Endurance Championship, so Helmut Marko was in need for a driver. Ellen, therefore, was to receive her shot next time round at Le Mans. Things went well in practice until a broken gearbox prevented her from setting a competitive lap time in qualifying, excluding her from the event. And that was that. Game over. End of story. Now, where others could rely on bags of cash to continue their dream, Ellen wasn't as fortunate. Throughout her career, some had suggested that she should be a bit more, how do I put this, sexual in her approach to marketing. Not to discredit such activities myself, that would be unfair, but it just wasn't for Ellen. The more professional the sport became, the more managers were seemingly looking for women to present themselves in a very specific way. Less so bespectacled chemistry student from Mönchengladbach, more so lizard enthusiast in bikinis. So how do you earn a budget for F3000 when sponsors aren't lining your pockets and your family doesn't own a fortune? Well, you sign a works deal with Mercedes-Benz and hope for the best. Year on year, her performances weren't awe-inspiring. That said, she didn't always have the same equipment as her teammates. Directly comparing them in terms of positions therefore becomes quite a tricky task. She continued racing for Mercedes, with the brand even rewarding her efforts in early 1994. Merck had arranged an F1 test with the then partnered Sauber, a kind of gift for her efforts in DTM. Yet this inaugural outing in a V10 Monster was cut short when Karl Wendlinger, days before the scheduled test, injured himself in Monaco, in turn throwing the former F3 protege into a coma. The test was off, and to this day, Ellen Lohr has never had the chance to even just drive an F1 car. Her career was to continue with the silver lunchboxes regardless, right up until the dying breath of DTM in late 1996. She was still beloved by fans and competitors alike, though her time in the spotlight had seemingly come and gone. Future success at Dakar, truck racing, or Euro NASCAR was to follow. When it comes to mainstream attention, though, DTM 92 was probably the tipping point. And I do wonder, how come she's the only one? The only woman to ever win a DTM race? It's not as if there weren't capable competitors following her footsteps in years and decades to come. It probably goes back to the way Rainer Braun talks about this girl and her ferocious attitude. I don't doubt that Mercedes-Benz, DTM, and everyone involved was happy to see someone like Ellen succeed. That said, I'm not sure they drew any conclusions from her success regarding their own prejudice. Whenever Ellen talks about her career, she often refers to a lack of trust regarding women. A prime example would be her canceled F1 test. Was she never given a test because, well, she just wasn't good enough? Possibly, but there was an attitude at the time that women were physically inferior to the point where handling a V10 beast would just be too much to ask of them. Yeah, considering that DTM didn't have power steering at the time, something that Ellen's teammate Klaus Ludwig had asked for, not Lohr, you can see why she was a bit annoyed. Whether DTM cars on qualifying tires truly were more difficult to tame than any given open-wheel weapon of the time can be questioned. Still, if you don't know how she might fare, you could just, give her a shot? Every time I saw Mr. Peter Sauber afterwards, he was saying, I have a bad conscience, I have a bad conscience. Well, bad conscience is one thing. Give me a drive. That would be good. But it never happened again. That was my missed chance, or one of the 2 or 3 missed chances in my life. A similar lack of trust could go to explain her subsequent seasons with limited machinery at Mercedes. You can't be sure whether she got what was necessary to thrive. Racing might present itself as a meritocracy, but how do you reach your own peak in performance when those supplying the tools just assume you're not up for it? And even if you were to receive the equipment necessary, what does that level of distrust do to a driver's confidence? Knowing that, even when nobody says it out loud, every inch of equality, no matter how benign it may seem, is still to be fought for, something not to be considered by your competitors. Did her performance fall off in years to come? Was her machinery as solid as it was supposed to be? How would the environment at Mercedes have influenced her pace and confidence? Ellen herself doesn't seem to blame mechanics or bosses for her subsequent fate. In fact, she points to what she describes as middle management during an interview with The Race in 2020. Once you're stuck with mediocre machinery, that's when the biases, the negative assumptions seemingly start to kick into gear. Interviews and documentaries from the early 90s show just how impressed and shocked people within the paddock were regarding Ellen's performance. To quote our mustachioed mastermind,
unwahrscheinlich aggressiv im Auto. Das hat mir am meisten überrascht und beeindruckt. Ich habe nicht gewusst, dass Frauen so aggressiv sein können überhaupt.
Wurden Sie schon mal von einer Frau überholt?
Nee, ich glaube noch nicht.
Okay, he said that before the race, lol. It just seems that whenever Ellen or any woman within the world of racing was talked about, an air of patronizing praise tended to prevail. The shock uttered by Rosberg and others wouldn't really subside in future years. The emphasis on how impressive all of this was for a girl, as if we're talking about a child and not a fully grown woman kicking your ass. As if this was an exception to the rule of racing, a shock to the system based on a random whim, not someone smashing an unnecessary glass ceiling. In a way, you could say that the culture didn't change. See, if we are to believe that all the key decision makers, all those financing projects within the realm of racing are truly happy to see women succeed, it doesn't mean they're happy to change. It doesn't mean they enjoy the idea of their misogyny being challenged, that the concept of the boys club is being tackled. Ellen herself kind of reflected on that back in a 1993 interview.
Alibi-Frau drängt sich natürlich immer auf, wenn man die Einzige unter so vielen ist. Aber ich glaube, sie ist mir gar nicht mehr begegnet. Am Anfang vielleicht, natürlich. Aber dann durch Erfolge und durch das Zeigen, hier, es geht, und ich bin auch von der Leistung dabei, dann widerlegt sich das von selbst. Trotzdem denke ich, dass es in einigen Hinterköpfen noch umschwirrt. Die Leute, die wirklich noch so denken, die kann ich wahrscheinlich gar nicht mehr überzeugen. Oder aber durch noch bessere Leistung oder so. Aber ich glaube, das hängt bei denen dann wirklich damit gar nicht zusammen. Also da könnte ich 25 Siege hintereinander fahren und die würden es immer noch denken, wahrscheinlich beim ersten Mal zweiter Startplatz oder sowas. Von daher will ich da auch gar keine Überzeugungsarbeit leisten. Entweder die Leute akzeptieren, dass ich dabei bin, weil ich es von der Leistung auch bringe. Oder aber sie sehen mich halt als die Alibi-Frau, die ich hoffentlich nicht bin, die ich auch nicht glaube zu sein. Und da kann ich halt nichts mehr dran ändern. Also ich persönlich wünsche mir eigentlich mehr Frauen in dem Sport. Als Teamchefs, als wie jetzt meinetwegen Carmen Ziegler bei Sauber, Formel 1. Also es geht. Als meinetwegen auch Mechanikerin oder so. Also wäre einfach netter, ein gemischtes Umfeld zu haben. Aber es ist halt nicht der Fall. Es ist, insofern muss ich mich mit der Männerriege engagieren und tue das auch natürlich. Ich will nicht zu feministisch werden, aber natürlich muss man da einige Kämpfe als Frau austragen, wenn man mit einem rein männlichen Umfeld zu tun hat. Das ist ganz klar. Und natürlich muss ich da auch versuchen, ein paar, ich will jetzt nicht zu krass werden, ein paar Strukturen vielleicht aufzuweichen oder versuchen zu verändern. Aber deswegen trete ich nicht in dem Sport an. Es ergibt sich einfach. Ja. Aber ich sag mal, im Großen und Ganzen haben sich meine Chefs auch schon ein bisschen emanzipiert, seit ich dabei bin. Von daher geht's.
One thing is for certain. Ever since Ellen turned the world of DTM upside down, things have changed somewhat. Racing series are actively trying to look for women in all kinds of positions. F1 Academy is the latest example of Grand Prix racing, granting chances that Ellen could only dream of in the 1990s. Other problems, generally speaking, haven't been tackled. Paddocks are yet to become safe spaces for women or any marginalized group, in fact. Alleged abusers are still heralded as heroes of the craft, whether it be on the big screen or as part of the Grand Prix pit wall. Research confirms the immensely negative impact of misogyny on women within the world of motorsport. More than just a driver, a study of professional women race car drivers' agency in motorsport isn't just a fascinating insight into the broad, sometimes contradictory experiences present in motor racing. It very much mirrored what Ellen talks about in many ways: the family background in go-karting, with the father figure at the forefront, not being taken seriously or feeling a lack of trust, the invalidation of accomplishments, struggling to secure sponsorship, representing an entire gender in a constant fight with windmills, every obstruction from norm a potential career killer. Objectification, abuse, and harassment still stay a prominent issue similarly, as outlined by works such as Beyond Grit Girls and Checkered Flags, exploring sexual objectification at motorsport events. So while the ball is rolling, we're not anywhere close to where we need to be. The few attempts at trying to include women into the circle of racing have mostly centered around white, able-bodied women who often fit a specific mold of what is expected out of femininity. Any norms regarding self-expression typically remain unchallenged. Ellen's role in this, from my perspective, is complicated. At times, she has spoken out against prejudice regarding women performing well in the world of racing. The obvious black spot I can think of would be her association with the German Emma magazine, a self-proclaimed feminist outlet known for their trans-exclusionary and sex work exclusionary stance. Not sure whether Ellen is aware of the transphobia present or not, nor am I aware of her position on sex work and the magazine's continuous discrimination against this group of people. I feel I should at least acknowledge this, not to rain on her parade, rather to point to her status of queen not being something I wish to uphold. Her demanding that women demand more in racing is something I consider a positive, that girls stay outspoken and basically don't take any shit. She wouldn't, as far as we can tell.
Man muss leider in dem Job schon eine gewisse Angepasstheit an den Tag legen, aber trotzdem glaube ich, dass ich noch meinen eigenen Kopf habe. Ich meine, das klassische oder das Beispiel, was sich bei mir natürlich immer aufdrängt, ist, ich bin die Frau in der Männergesellschaft oder in dem Männerumfeld und Job. Und also wurde mir von Anfang an natürlich immer gesagt, Mensch, nutz das doch aus und lauf doch ein bisschen im Röckchen durch die Gegend und so weiter. Wenn ich das gemacht hätte, wäre das wirklich zu viel Angepasstheit gewesen. Für mich als Frau bin ich aber sicher noch ein bisschen unbequem, weil mir weil ich schon meinen eigenen Kopf ein bisschen durchsetze. Das heißt, eben mir nicht die Haare in langen Dauerwellen wachsen lasse, sondern so trage, wie ich es für richtig halte, etc. Und auch meine Meinung bei dem Thema offen kundtue.
I'm not sure how to feel about her criticism of other women seemingly taking up spots, dragging down the overall reputation of them racing. I suppose if we're to blame people, maybe we should start with those seeking specific stereotypes, the companies, CEOs, lusting after a very clear-cut idea of femininity in racing, irrespective of talent, very much based on what they perceive to be a canvas to market themselves on. It's not an issue exclusive to women, obviously, though if we're to acknowledge the huge discrepancy in how many girls start in go-karts compared to the sheer number of boys, you can see how such a fine window would hurt them even more. I do believe that DTM and Mercedes royally up the lessons in regard to Ellen's achievements. Instead of questioning their assumptions and behavior, their attitude and patronizing speech, actions we would have never seen or heard on television, they did in fact lean into the idea of tokenism. Look at all these women we have on the grid, they'd say, continuously acting in shock and awe as though they were alien to the culture. Never were they to question why that was, why there were so few of them, why in fact they weren't as prevalent as, according to Ellen, they had been in go-karting back in the 70s and 80s. quick women are anything but a new phenomenon in motorsport. Figures like Ellen are uncomfortable to such status quos. How much? That is difficult to say. I wasn't there. Though for every bit of marketing they might have been able to do, there would have been a few headaches as well, being confronted with somebody who stuck to her guns and didn't yield. That isn't to call Ellen Lohr the encompassing feminist vanguard in DTM history. Maybe more so than her success or her role as the only woman to win in DTM, or her position as someone somewhat present in self-proclaimed feminist outlets. That attitude could/should be taken on board, challenging norms both in performance and persistence, so that possibly we don't just chase the next queen to crown, the next champion of women TM, but question the idea of proverbial monarchy to begin with, furthering significant long-term change for everyone, supporting and forming collectives. After all, a girl can dream, right?